So it's like you are over here and then your traumatic experience is here. And normally for people, it feels like it's right here and I can't escape it and it's going to eat me and I'm going to drown and it's all encompassing and it doesn't feel safe for me to access. So I keep it in a box. I don't allow it to be seen and therefore I do not process it. But if I can be here and the box can be open over here and I can have this like little safety bubble, like you're wearing a life jacket or whatever, and it's keeping you at bay a little bit, and I can intentionally choose how and when and what I'm doing to process, then I can fully resolve it. It doesn't need to live in a box because it can move through me.
When you get to that place of realization that I can't control someone else, I can only control how I respond. Could they do some horrible things? Possibly. Could they do some really nice things? Possibly, but it's out of your control. So why not focus on the things that you can control instead of being focused on the things that's out of your control that's just going to end up poisoning your mindset.
An exploration of trauma, transformation, and triumph. Your healing starts here.
And we are back with another episode of Through the Trauma Podcast. I am Amber, your host. And today I have with me Miss Julie Hagen. Now, Julie is a former lawyer. She broke out of 20 years of people pleasing and anxiety through a combination of personal development, somatic processing, thought work, and intentional psychedelic practice. I know this is going to be a really amazing conversation because she's into a lot of the things that I have found recently super interesting, including energy work and how that all works with our body. Then working also with different modalities such as psilocybin and the macro and micro and macro levels combined. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation. Julie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to, dive into this conversation.
Yeah, me too. This is right up my alley. I believe in natural, holistic as much as possible. And, it's just always fascinates me how the body works and how even these types of modalities with the psilocybin and the psychedelic, it's like I guess some of them are illegal, some illegal inside of the U.S. You can, I'm sure, elaborate a little bit on that. But to me, they're getting more acceptable and more people are finding use with these types of modalities. So I'm excited for you to share with us kind of what you've seen in your practice and what you do as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's definitely the landscape feels a lot like early years of cannabis legislation and legalization. And I know we're not across the board by any means with cannabis, but we're getting there. And I see the trend progressing in the same way with psychedelics. And the way that I like to think about psychedelics and why so many people have sort of let go of past ideas or the way that we were brought up or conversations we had about them. I'm sure most of your audience remembers DARE, is because that psychedelics can lead to real root cause healing, whereas a lot of prescriptions, things you're going to get, pharmaceuticals, they're really going to band-aid our symptoms and, relieve us from some of the intensity of the pain of sort of mental anguish, but they're not going to get to what really is causing that. And until we get there, you're never going to be at 100%. So I'm so passionate about my work because it's done true healing for me and others.
And you're not the only one that I've heard say that. I kind of have a different view of pharmaceuticals, and I think you and I probably align on that because I do feel like it's a Band-Aid. It's something that is so easy. It's easy. There's a lot of money around it. And so it's so easy for people to push. It's easy for people to get their hands on. It's easy for doctors to prescribe. And of course, once you're on a prescription medication, you have to go back and forth to the doctor. So there's a lot of things around that just doesn't sit right with me. And I don't know that we've been told the complete truth about what pharmaceuticals do and the different side effects and the different body systems. You use a pharmaceutical to treat one body system and then something else. There's a consequence. There's something else that starts to fail or is affected. But with natural medicine, I feel like you don't really have as many of those side effects and those different things. Do you find that when obviously you've worked with this psychedelics for a while. So obviously, I guess if there's people are misusing them, there's side effects or whatever, but do you see that inside of your work?
So my two of my biggest focuses, the biggest areas of focus for me are intention and integration. So I always feel like with intentional use, what you're going to have instead of an unintended side effect is an unexpected benefit. And so I started asking every single person I work with at the end of our work together, what is something that you gained from this process that you didn't think about? And so for people, they'll say, well, I started sleeping a lot better, or my relationships improved, or I started setting boundaries and being more responsive instead of reactive. Yes, I found that people aren't experiencing negative side effects. I work with psilocybin, so people might colloquially referred to as magic mushrooms. So people do have a mushroom allergy, for instance, right? Like I'm not your person. You can't work with me, but that is just, everyone's allergic to something. Whereas things like, I'm opening a second and related but unrelated business, doing laser therapy treatment for healing tissues and muscles within the body. And one case study that really stuck out to me was the man that I worked with who was taking a medication for eczema. And, one of those little side effects was corneal failure. So now he's had 2 corneal replacements, can barely see, is suffering with perhaps another corneal rejection, all because of his eczema. Whereas like if he had found this laser earlier, he could have been using the laser to treat the underlying cellular malfunction that is causing his eczema and then receive no side effects, negative ones from the laser.
So this brings up an interesting point to me, because I am starting, like, obviously I have looked at trauma for this podcast has been around for 2 years. And then even before that, I had taken a huge interest and passion in just trauma. But I've recently been reading some material that is really leaning me towards this idea of believing that so many of the things, the ailments and things that we find in our bodies is results of unresolved and like trauma that's almost stored in the body. And it's funny that you bring this up about the correlation of the eczema and then the cornea, because it's like, if things do originate from trauma, and I'm not saying they all do, but it's very interesting to look at, like, what things am I sick from? And then how much of that is coming from unresolved trauma being the root cause? But then on the flip side of that, how is this affecting other body systems? And, as if this goes untreated, or if it goes treated but unresolved. So the eczema, I guess from what I understand about eczema, you can't really heal it. You can just get it better. Is that?
So I wouldn't consider myself an expert in skin conditions at all, but I do know that conditions like eczema do receive a vast improvement by using the laser. But I'm going to go ahead and say yes to your question, because for a case like eczema, it does require like a monthly maintenance session with the laser in order to keep the symptoms at bay. And it is truly interesting, the point about trauma being stored in the body, because I think a lot of your listeners have probably read The Body Keeps a Score, right? And other works that were built off of that. And I like to say that the past only lives in 2 places. It lives in your memory and it lives in your body, right? And so you can feel that even when someone might bring up something from your past, and you can feel a contraction, that it's still there. It still has an energy, and that being able to process the past and fully experience it in our bodies is in my mind the only way that we're really going to move forward in a powerful way.
Yeah. And I think there is where the gold is. That's where everything lies. It's like, this is what Western medicine won't tell us or won't talk about even, is that our bodies are run on energy. And I'm sure we're going to get into talking about energy, but everything in our entire universe is energetic. So if everything is run on energy and our emotions and trauma is carried, it has a certain frequency that it carries, why wouldn't these types of modalities work? And I think that's the thing where really with this platform and having guests like yourself on is letting people know, hey, these modalities are very valuable. It seems woo-woo to some people, but it's not at all. Go ahead.
Well, so one of my best friends is big in biotech, and she's more like on the financial side. And she told me, we were having a really interesting conversation about fibromyalgia in particular. And she was like, did you know that most benefits from any prescription, like literally every prescription out there, are placebo? Like meaning that someone might say, I feel better, but if a scientist were to run a test on you, there isn't a noticeable change in the data of the test, whether it be like looking at running a panel, a blood panel, or measuring electromagnetic frequencies, etc. So because we can't record a noticeable change from testing subjects, then we have to go to the conclusion that it's a placebo effect. So like, let's say even this, if that's what's true of pharmaceuticals, even if that's true of this energy woo-woo stuff, it's still making a positive difference in someone's life. And I would much rather spend an hour receiving a Reiki treatment than put my body full of chemicals with tons of unintended consequences and receive the benefit. Because at the end of the day, like, it's negligible either way you look at it.
That's so good. And it's so true. Although I do believe the more that someone does look into this kind of healing and these different types of modalities, they will see. I'm just going to say it. I feel like we've been lied to. I feel like there's been a lot of stuff swept under the rug to keep us from true healing, because the industry in and of itself, the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of money involved in that. And there's a lot of money involved in keeping us sick.
I mean, look at all of the new shows and documentaries and just content that's being created around the opioid epidemic and how Big Pharma acted when that was up and coming, and continues. Like, there continue to be pain clinics, and we're doling out oxycodone and Percocet and all of these things. And we know how bad it is for our bodies, but they continue to do it. And I'm just not here for it.
I'm not here for it either. And it makes me angry, really, when I see that people, I feel like we've been brainwashed, and I feel like people are still under that kind of mindset. But I do think in the scope of how things are going now with podcasting, with people getting more holistic, I mean, and just with more things coming out about what the pharmaceutical industry has their hands in. It's like people, I think, are getting more, they want to learn more. They want to know more. They want to explore more of their own modalities and figure out. And I don't know if this is an age thing for me, because I'm in my 40s, and I do think something changed around that 40-year mark where it was just like, I'm ready to let go of a lot of this stuff that I've drugged with me, this baggage that I've carried my entire life. And I think something does happen as you get older. You just start to explore more things. So I don't know how much of that is my generation and how much of that is like what's currently happening. But I do think the ushering of social media, and the more we talk about it and the more things that we follow to do with mental health, we're making strides.
Yeah, I think as a society for so long, we just assumed the values and desires of past generations, and more now we're feeling liberated from that necessity. And instead we're doing a lot more self-inquiry into, hey, like, what do I actually want? And I know that was really my journey I felt very funneled into like becoming a lawyer. And man, was I so unhappy. And then I sat down and thought, hey, like, what do I actually want? And my mom was one of those amazing people who always wanted to be a mom, and that was her whole thing. And so I think I also thought, like, I should be a mom, but it's been a much different journey for me deciphering whether or not that's something I really want for myself. And I'm a big believer, if you don't know with your whole heart that like a little life is something you want to bring into this world, like, don't burden another soul by, thinking you need to become a mom or a dad and then become an absent parent or a resentful parent, etc. So I know for me, if I decide, it's going to be with a whole body yes.
Yeah. Well, I will say this just from a mom's point of view. Kids do change everything. They change your entire life. But sometimes that's a good thing. But, I do think when you make the decision, the conscious decision, it's like, that is good to be in a place where you're like, I'm ready to make this conscious decision. Some people, I think it happens without the conscious decision. It's like, well, it's meant to be. But I did want you to tell us a little bit about, magic mushrooms, which is the psilocybin. How long have you worked with this modality?
Yeah. So I did not experiment with psychedelics as a young person. I was very scared. Dare was very effective on me. I also grew up Catholic and went to Catholic high school. And I recently found like a little statement I wrote about all sorts of things like I was not and was going to do. And so I'm still a big fan of Jesus and God, but I also have stepped away from the Catholic Church a little bit. But so I was very scared and I wasn't messing around with, those substances. And I was invited. I got out of the law and I started coaching and I got certified to coach. And a woman I met in my coaching certification asked me to run a nonprofit that she had founded because of my prior legal experience. And that was amazing. And it was a beautiful experience to step into that role. And she was big into the plant medicine world in LA. And so she had, told me about an ayahuasca ceremony that she was attending and invited me to attend. And it felt like a very big yes for me. And it was such a big departure from like doing nothing to doing ayahuasca. And I don't think that should be or is everyone's trajectory, because of every plant medicine has a different energy, and ayahuasca definitely is like the grandmother. She is the stern grandmother who you might get a spanking from. But that just really changed my mind and opened my eyes. And from there, I was introduced to this concept of microdosing. And I thought, hey, like there's so much to be gained from plant medicine. How cool would it be to get the benefits without being, for lack of a better word, like incapacitated, right? Like no one's going to drive on ayahuasca. No one's going to have a conversation like this on ayahuasca, but to take a plant medicine at a smaller level. And then I got into researching psilocybin, the active compound, and magic mushrooms specifically. And from there, it all kind of unfolded. But that was 5 years ago, pandemic time. And it's changed my life. And no matter, like, I'm opening this other business and I'm excited about that. But I know in my heart, I don't think I'll ever give up fully this work because it's so impactful.
So what kind of things have you seen? Do you work with people in person or do you work with them online?
Both. So both. I'll have quarterly-ish macrodosing retreats. So a mushroom ceremony where you can come with me for the weekend. I take all of the fear and anxiety and kind of like unknownness about the experience. I pride myself on creating really safe, comfortable containers for women. I only work with women in the in-person space for them to experience this and to be able to do the deeper processing around, oftentimes their trauma. I can remember one of the first women who came to my very first retreat, a woman who was in her 50s and who I knew, but also felt like she kind of kept herself at bay a little bit. I loved her. I thought she was great, but I could tell I didn't have the full picture of who she was. And so through that process, I had no idea that this would come up for her or that this was part of her history, but she had grown up in a very physically abusive household. Alcohol was involved and feeling like the parent who wasn't drunk should have protected her. And so in her experience, she went back and like almost like a movie reviewed her experience and her trauma and her abuse and was able to like protect herself and kind of reparent herself and mother herself in a way that she did not receive at that time. And in that way, I like to say close the loop for herself of being able to powerfully rewrite that story so that it would no longer follow her. And that is what this work is all about. It gives us the opportunity to safely and fully process and re-narrate what has gone on in our past. So when I think about her and that story, I'm just like so grateful that I found this work and have been able to share it with so many other people.
Can you kind of take us through what someone could expect? So say that someone said, I've this unresolved trauma, or I think sometimes people can't even process what type of trauma they have. It's just like, hey, I'm procrastinating a lot and I want to get to the bottom of this. Like it drives me crazy about myself. So then they start to figure out like what type, maybe like some of the trauma that has affected them or whatever, but they're in that space. They come to you and they're like, hey, I'm dealing with this thing and I want to see if psilocybin is the answer. What does that process look like? Do you then interview them to be sure they're like the right fit for it? Kind of take us through that process.
Yeah, I'm so happy you said that part about having a conversation, because I know for a lot of coaches, they'll kind of try to push you toward, just sign up. And I do have one or two things where if you just want to sign up and that's more your speed, that's totally fine. But to work on like a larger one-on-one level with like a more intensity, right? Whether it be like a larger microdosing program or a retreat, I do always have a conversation because I also want to make sure that the work that we do together is very personal. And most importantly, if I'm not your person or you don't feel comfortable with me, like you're not going to have the best experience. So I want you to know who I am before we jump in. And I'll also say there have been some people who I didn't feel like safe doing that work with. Not like I didn't personally feel safe, but they weren't in a mental space where I thought that was probably like the best thing for them. So I do their retreats, and that is always a conversation first too, because it's a small intimate group and I want to make sure like everyone is the right fit for each other. And again, none of this is from a place of judgment. It's just always wanting to come from a place of integrity and how I create containers. But what you were saying about, hey, I think something's going on, but I don't know the deeper thing. There was a woman and we had hopped on a conversation like this to join one of my larger microdosing programs that go on for several rounds or several months of microdosing. And so she shared some of the things that she was working on. It's funny you said procrastination. That was one. And she knew there was a deeper level of healing available to her. And she was excited to see what could come up through this process of microdosing. And so she was through 2 rounds of microdosing. So in my programs, you microdose for a month, you'll take a break. That's really important so you don't build up a tolerance. And then you'll come back to it and take a break. And I believe it was in her second break, her second integration period, she came to the call and she said, Julie, I remembered something and I'm having a really difficult time. And so she shared that she had been sexually assaulted in college and she had, as most people do, not given like the environment or the space or the tools to deal with something in the moment, put it in a box. And I don't even know that if she had been asked like, hey, have you ever experienced sexual assault? If she would have answered yes, like I don't know that it was really conscious for her at all until she created enough safety in her body for it to come to the surface. And then we were able to process it. But that's really what I believe is part of the magic is it. I like to say that microdosing or going to a retreat and having a macrodose creates a bubble of safety. So it's like you are over here and then your traumatic experience is here. And normally for people, it feels like it's right here and I can't escape it and it's going to eat me and I'm going to drown and it's all encompassing and it doesn't feel safe for me to access. So I keep it in a box. I don't allow it to be seen and therefore I do not process it. But if I can be here and the box can be open over here and I can have this like little safety bubble, like you're wearing a life jacket or whatever, and it's keeping you at bay a little bit, and I can intentionally choose how and when and what I'm doing to process, then I can fully resolve it. It doesn't need to live in a box because it can move through me. And that's really the benefit of this work for trauma.
So when someone starts, so say that all pans out and they're the right person, the right fit for you. So at that point, if they're not in a retreat setting, do you then prescribe them dosages or is it like a month on? I know you mentioned that there's like an off period. What does that look like exactly?
Yeah, so for the retreats, the doses are all very customized. And I, again, make sure everyone feels really comfortable, but I explain to them different doses. And, for some people, they are what I like to call like experienced psychonauts, but they've never had an intentional guided experience. And so they're excited to see what's available to them there. But like, let's say, you're more of a first timer and you're just ready to be open. I'd probably say like, 2 to 3 grams, right? But for microdosing, my whole tagline, I feel like could be slow and low because I tell people you don't want to feel it. If you're microdosing, the point is not to feel it. We want to make sure that dose is really low. You're still going to get a lot of benefit. And if you're feeling like it's not the right dose for you, we can always go up, but I would rather start low and go up than have you feel any type of way and go down. So everyone in all of my programs starts at 100 milligrams. And then the schedule they follow is really dependent on they're looking to work on. So that's part of the process too. Like, oh, okay. It's almost like you're filling out an intake form and I'm clicking boxes like, oh, okay, this is the perfect one for you. And then I would actually say most people stay at 100. They get a lot of benefit from that. They take their rest periods as they're supposed to, and that allows so that tolerance doesn't build up. But staying at 100 is really doable and safe and very effective for most people.
And is this like a meditative thing? Like they enter into like a meditative state and then that's where they process these things?
That's a beautiful question. I like to say that everyone's magic formula for microdosing looks different. And my role is to help you create the perfect practice for you. So I do encourage people to make microdosing a ritual, a ceremony. So a very intentional and special act in their life. But I know I love to meditate, right? I microdose and meditate and who knows where I go. But I know meditation isn't for everyone, and that's totally fine. So I actually believe like the woman that I was speaking about in my microdosing program, she was having it came up like in her emotions first. And so she sat down and started journaling, and through journaling, because that was the modality that she liked the best, it popped out. It was like, oh, I had been sexually assaulted. And it just landed in her body that this was the cause of these, like, she was being really snippy with her partner and she was just having this aversion to being intimate with him, despite him being an amazing, loving partner that she had been with for a long time. And she realized that it was her body finally bringing the trauma to the surface for it to be processed.
That's the first time I had heard of this type of thing happening. Was when I was first reading The Body Keeps the Score. And there is a part in there, and it stuck with me, where he talks about someone being inside of his group. And he said, I just assumed, do you remember this part in the book where he said, I just assumed she knew she had been I think she'd been molested. And he said, she comes to me like she'd been in the program weeks, and she comes to him and says, "Hey, do you think I could have been molested?" And he's like, "I was thinking she knew that the whole time." But that was the first time I had ever realized that our bodies and our brains can do that, to where we just stuff the trauma so far that we even forget it because we're not able, I guess, to handle it in that moment, which is why I think this kind of work and any kind of work that can pull those things, like you said, to the surface is so valuable, because those types of things, I am truly of the belief that they will manifest out in the body some way. They're going to manifest in sickness. They're going to manifest in triggers. They're going to manifest out in some type of way. So getting to the bottom and getting healed, that's like getting to the root. Then you're not going to need, medical or pharmaceutical drugs. You're not going to need the Band-Aids. If people lean into these things like drugs and alcohol and sex sometimes being one of the things. And I just think that, the addictive things, sometimes that goes away when you get to the root of the problem.
Yeah, I really believe that about addiction. Like I know that there's a biochemical component to addiction, and that some bodies are more wired toward that compulsive behavior. And I don't think that anything is like one-sided. Like everything has components and facets. And I am a firm believer that all addiction, there is some root within ourselves, and maybe it is specifically, we're going to call it trauma, or, something from childhood, or, earlier in our history that's causing us to want to numb in that way.
Yeah. And I've thought that too about addiction. The more that I learn about mental health, and the more that I learn about how we cope through mental health and through trauma in general, it's alarming, because our bodies are it's like our bodies are these genius things that protect us, but yet also it's like we have to work with, and it's like this dance we have to do together with our bodies to be sure that we're not holding those things. We are letting go. We are trying to process through these things. And I wish I wish we talked about it more. And I feel like that's what we do on platforms like this, which we try to just bring it to the surface and talk about it, because sometimes people can deal with these things for years and they don't know why. And if it's a trauma at the bottom of it, it's like, that's fixable.
So I don't think I know that my big trauma was losing my dad at a really young age. He died when I was 6. And so, speaking about not knowing what's going on for us, I experienced disassociation in my body very intensely, really, until I found psychedelics. So over 20 years. And it was so disorienting, and I didn't have a word for it. And, we didn't grow up talking about mental health in my household. And like, I would have panic attacks, but I didn't understand what was happening. And man, I am so open about my experience now, and I have nothing to hide from anyone, in the hopes that someone who is dealing with something that I have dealt with at least hears me name it and hears me describe it, and doesn't think like they're losing their mind, or they're crazy, or like something's wrong with their brain. And they know, hey, like, actually, this is a very common response to trauma. No wonder I feel like have no control over my body, and I'm just like living in this weird robotic house. Like, that's disassociation. Okay, cool. I know what it is now. Great. Let me Google it and see what I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the more that you go down that rabbit hole, then you find modalities that can truly help. And, I tell people every modality is not for every person. Try different things, because while, talk therapy may work for some people, plant medicines may work for some people, energy healing may work, and sometimes it's a combination of things. It's just getting to the bottom of it. But I do want to talk a little bit about energy, of course, and your experience with that, because I know that it's something that, that you kind of talk about in your bio a little bit. But what are your thoughts on energy healing, and how our bodies respond to that? The energetic component, how that plays a role.
Yeah. I mean, totally agree with what you said at the beginning. Everything is energy, and that's not woo. That is science. Like, I'm looking down at my desk right now, and I know that in my desk are billions, if not more trillions, tiny vibrating atoms, so that even if we see something that is solid, everything that is making up the solid object is moving, is in a state of motion. Nothing is still or at rest when you get down to like the most microscopic level. And when I teach, at conferences and things, and I'm just teaching a more broad business principles, I'll always say energy is your currency. And energy is ultimately going to be the thing that determines whether or not you are successful. And we don't have to look at it at a woo perspective. We can think about two people providing the same service. One is a Debbie Downer. One is constantly negative and speaking ill of other people. One is super positive and engages with you and remembers your daughter's name and, shares something good that happened in her day. Which one are you going to hire, right? Obviously, the smiley one who remembers details about your life and not the person who talks bad about your neighbor, unless maybe you don't like your neighbor either, but that's a different story. And so in that, looking at it that way, energy is always determining your outcome. Even if we don't want to get into the woo of like, does Reiki work or not? Energy at a very practical, easy to understand level is the determining factor for all of our interactions.
Are you familiar at all with muscle testing?
Yeah. So I'm not a facilitator of it, but I have someone who I have gone to for muscle testing.
It's a very interesting thing to me that I did not believe at first. Honest with you, I was like, I don't know how that works. So I didn't believe it. But the more that I've researched it, the more that I think there's some value to that. At least figuring out, muscle testing in and of itself is not necessarily a modality, but it's a process to ask your subconscious what is truly going on and where you can, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong with your understanding of this, but I think that it's getting to the bottom of where those stored emotions are so that you can figure out how to release those emotions.
So when I've experienced muscle testing, I did it through a functional health practitioner who used muscle testing to help like diagnose. And so I thought it was very interesting. And I'm a believer in it for no other reason than just feeling like sometimes, when I ask myself questions or I'm making decisions about what I want to do, I notice like if I say, even something as simple as like, do you want to get pizza? And I notice like a little ping in my back or something, that's like a no, but it's like, oh, but what about that chicken salad you love? And if I can feel myself relax, like if I notice my body just kind of like doesn't go limp, but I'm like able to soften, that to me is a yes from my body. And I believe that our body is always telling us things either through contraction or expansion and relaxation. And when we're able to notice that and to listen to it, then life just becomes a lot better and a lot easier because your body is talking to you. But that does take a certain level of somatic awareness and attuneness. And that I think is a result of a long time of practicing this work. And maybe not everyone is so aware or tapped in and dropped into their body to be able to do that for themselves.
It is a beautiful place to get into though, when you begin to learn to be more intuitive. And this is not something I am a very resistant person regardless. I don't like to feed into things until I know how they work. So I'm like, I guess you could say I don't have a lot of faith, even though like I'm a Christian. I believe I have faith in that, but it's like even that I had to figure out how it worked. I had to figure out why it was the way that it was for me to be a true believer in it. And I just think that once you go down the rabbit hole and you start figuring these things out, you learn that we are very intuitive beings and we're very intuitive with everything around us, which leads me back to this whole thing of energy. Why is it that we can be energetically filled when we do grounding, where we put our feet into the grass and it works because I've done it, and I didn't believe in it at first, but I do think there's a value to that. And it's almost as if we were created to work in collaboration with the universe and with the world that's around us as human beings. And it's really beautiful because I think when people can see that, you can start to move out of like taking this magic pill to fix things. And you can see that we have the power, our brains have the power, our bodies have the power, and the energy that's around us. With all of that, we have the power to do magnificent things, in ourselves. So I think that all goes back into, even when we tie this back into mushrooms, well, they are natural medicine, or we tie this into, psychedelics, natural, which I'm a firm believer to tackle everything naturally as much as possible first before. I'm not saying there's not a place for medicine and doctors and Western medicine and all these things. I think there is a place for that. I just think that we run to those things way more than we should when we have the ability in and of ourselves and in natural means to be able to heal.
Yeah, well, living in communion with universe, God, and nature, like, there's a lot of money to be made in that. So capitalism is never going to teach us about it. It's never going to push it out to us. And ultimately, the powers that be, with people with the big money and the like wheels that turn, they're going to continue to feed us a different story. And I think it's really important that, even if you're listening to this and super skeptical of everything that's been said thus far, I applaud you just for listening, because how quick are we to hear something that maybe we don't agree with and just turn it off, right? We're very quick as a society, I feel like nowadays, to refuse to engage in a discourse and simply like cling so strongly to our beliefs and be very inflexible in them.
And that's so true. It's so true. And just as human relationships, how much easier could we get along if we just would hear other people's point of views? You don't have to agree with it. Just hear it.
That is so interesting, because I just received a message today from a woman who went through one of my programs and is going to go into my one-on-one work. And she was telling me all the things she had used the other program for. And she was talking about how she chose to end a long-term relationship. It's funny. I kind of think I'm the relationship whisperer, because I'll always know if a client either should or soon will break up with their person. But I knew this one was coming. But she spoke about it from a very empowered place of like, this was a decision I got to make for myself. And there was no pettiness or wishing of ill will or demonizing the other person. And I thought, wow, what if we could leave every interaction with that, especially like in a dynamic with contention, right? So either someone you don't agree with, someone you're ending a relationship with, someone who maybe they just annoy you, but you could meet them from a space of your own personal power and, focusing on yourself instead of kind of demonizing and these ad hominem attacks of, you think this, then you must be a terrible person. What a leap of logic to get there. Like, how did you make those two things happen?
It's so true. And you said it. It's the most empowering place you can be when you realize it's like, I feel like when we can stop taking things so personal and we just get to the place where we're like, you know what? Our relationship served a beautiful time and space in this particular season of my life. But now it's not serving me. It's not serving you. I saw a statistic somewhere and I can't quote it, but it said that you can only know so many people in a certain given period of time.
150. I think you only can keep like around 150 people in your orbit. And that if you want to get closer to someone else, like someone has to drop.
Yeah. So it's very interesting because when you look at it like that, you're like, okay, somebody, like maybe you served a beautiful time in my life, but now it's time to move. We're growing apart and it's not personal. I don't hate you for that. I hope you don't hate me for that. We've just either one of us has outgrown the other or we've just grown in different directions. And it's so empowering and it's a beautiful thing when we can, I feel like, get to that place. So I don't know how, I think healing does facilitate that in some regards. Yeah.
Have you read The Four Agreements?
I think I started reading that book, but I'm really bad about sitting down and reading a book. And if it's not on Audible, I want to say that one's not on Audible.
I only ask because that's like one of the agreements, right? Like I'm not taking things personally. And like, what a beautiful world. Because at the end of the day, like even if I, am sassy, right, at the coffee shop, it's not about the barista. It's probably about the fact that like my mom said something that annoyed me this morning after I got off the phone with her and I'm still thinking about it. But we internalize everyone else's crap. That's their crap. It's not my crap. And like, we have to stop picking it up and trying to like make it about us. How selfish, how self-centered that we've tried to make everything about us.
I know it's a natural human, I think a human existence where it's like the world revolves around us and we have to consciously move past that, or like conscious self-talk says, hey, Amber, this is not about you right now. Like, yes, somebody cut you off on the freeway. You have no idea what they're going through. You have no idea what's wrong in their life. Like maybe they had an argument with their spouse this morning. Like life is not about you. They didn't cut you off to be a jerk to you. They cut you off because they're in a hurry to get to the hospital to see their kids, or, you never know. And, I think empathy is beautiful. And I think when people come from a place of healing, that is kind of added in. Like then we can respond in from a healthy place instead of responding from anger or reacting to just every little thing. everything's against us.
My grandma always used to say that people are doing the best they can with what they have. And I come back to that every single day and think like, I'm going to choose to believe that this person was coming from love in the way that they interacted with me or, what they said or anything else. Because your perception is totally a choice. You can choose to assume the worst, or you can assume to choose that they were coming from their best and maybe their delivery sucked or whatever. But that distinction is ultimately going to lead to how you feel. So you are in way more control than people want to accept or claim and take hold of. You're in way more charge of your own emotional state than a lot of people want to recognize.
Totally agree with you. And it's a beautiful thing. But I think this is the path to self-growth. And this is the ultimate path to getting to the place. You ask if I'd read the Four Agreements. I'm like, no, I don't think I've read the whole book, but I do listen to a lot of Stoic philosophy. And I love Stoic philosophy because it's all very much like you are responsible for regulating you. And, everything outside of you can't control. And that was one of the things when I went through my divorce, I really got clear. I spent a lot of time alone and in my own meditation where I got really clear on this idea that I can't control like what my ex did. Even we co-parent. I can't control what he does. I can only control me and how I respond to the things that I agree with or disagree with or am happy about or unhappy about or appreciate or, get annoyed by, whatever. You can only control you. And that empowers you when you get to that place of realization that I can't control someone else. I can only control how I respond. Could they do some horrible things? Possibly. Could they do some really nice things? Possibly, but it's out of your control, So why not focus on the things that you can control instead of being focused on the things that's out of your control that's just going to end up poisoning your mindset.
Yeah. And I think that's true empowerment. And I have this practice that I go through every morning and I'll say to myself, like, I call back the power I gave away to other people or that other people took from me, because and every time you allow someone else to dictate your emotional state, you're being powerless.
Amen. Yeah. That's right there. You just dropped the mic. So Julie, tell me a little bit about, so after someone goes through this process, I'm sure the results vary based on different people, different, where they're at and how they receive it. But what are some of the things that you've seen through working with this, through your clients and even in yourself? What are some of the results that you've seen that are long lasting, people carry with them? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I'm very data driven. So I actually have like a whole system of questions I'll ask people. And what that's allowed me to do is to see an actual measurable difference in how people are feeling, and they'll rate themselves 0 to 10, 10 being amazing, 0, not at all, before and then after. And what I've seen is a 40% increase. So, 4 to 8 or 5 to 9. And the question is like, how do you feel on average? And so I mentioned at the beginning, my two big pillars are intention and integration. Intention is that process of doing it with a purpose in a safe and guided way. And integration is this process of, okay, cool. I think everyone has had a breakthrough at therapy or coaching or whatever their thing is, but how often have you had that breakthrough and then nothing really came of it because there wasn't a system in place to support you in taking whatever the golden nugget was and actually changing something in your life to reflect the golden nugget? So that also is, I feel, my superpower is making sure that people really integrate the goodness and the change that they see. So when we think about positive benefits and like, why are people rating themselves, 40% higher? One woman went from feeling like she's a PA, very stressed out at work, burnt out, not making enough money, to after working together, she got a $30,000 increase and a $10,000 a year bonus. So money is sometimes the difference. Relationships are oftentimes the difference, either ending ones that we're no longer serving or being able to rework and kind of like renegotiate, I like to say, the boundaries of a relationship so that it could be successful again. Coming off of retreats, women dealing with like infertility, that's another thing, right? Like infertility is something a lot of people deal with. And man, oh man, can you spend tens of thousands, if not more, on infertility? We can get into the 100,000s if you're going to talk about adoption. The women who have spent tons on in vitro and vitamins and injections and all sorts of things come to a retreat and I believe energetically shifted something so that they were able to get pregnant. And then for myself, I always like to say my biggest win is I live with anxiety and depression for decades, and I am not anxious. I'm not depressed. Sometimes I experience anxiety. I think anxiety is just kind of a natural repercussion to sometimes, being worried about things that have not yet occurred and grasping for that control, wanting to be in control over something that we can't. And although I might experience it occasionally, I am not an anxious person. I am not a depressed person. And when I tell you, I can remember sitting on my couch sobbing when I was still a lawyer, thinking because I was on Prozac, I was trying all these things. Man, I'm always going to live with some level of anxiety and depression. That is just a life sentence that I truly believe that I had, to now sit here and say, no, yeah, life still lives, man. I have hard times, but I am a very happy and joyful person. And I really credit my work with psychedelics to that change in myself.
What do you think typically is how many sessions would this take for somebody? I would say on average, because I know it probably differs, but for somebody to move past some of these things or to start to even see a difference?
Yeah. So I always tell people 3 to 4 rounds of microdosing is going to make a really big difference for you. So whether, you want to do more work on your own and buy my DIY, programs that are out there for you, where I'll take you through the process, but in videos, maybe you don't face to face, you don't want to talk to me all the time. That's fine. I tell people in those emails, though, this will take you through a full month, and it'll give you everything that you need to do it in an intentional way it's kicking up that neuroplasticity, and it's helping you create new neural pathways in a way that's going to be supportive for you. And you have access to this work, go back and do it again. Wait your 2 weeks, do it again. That's very successful for a lot of people, but people in my higher level containers, like the woman that I spoke about who was able to open up after a couple months and realize the things from her past, that container is structured for 6 months or 4 rounds of active microdosing. And that's so that I can be with you through the whole thing of, we're microdosing, we're integrating for a couple weeks. For microdosing, we're integrating. Some people choose to just do 3 and they take a little bit longer integration periods between each. I encourage them to be very intuitive on hey, are you ready for your next one, or do we want to wait a little bit? But 3 to 4, you're going to see a beautiful change in your overall state of being in homeostasis.
And what is the time investment that someone would need? Say that they wanted to start microdosing. They would say, hey, I have this much time per week that I need to study through how to do this, or what is the time investment?
Let me think about my DIY program. So the DIYs at the beginning, it'll take about an hour just to go through okay, this is how you microdose, making sure they have a good understanding and setup. But if then I think about daily practice, I would say, 20 to 40 minutes, anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week. It kind of depends on the schedule that they go through. So not a lot of time for those people. And if they want to do the deeper one-on-one work, I would say expect an hour of coaching with me every week. And then in between continuing your own private practice, can spend anywhere from, again, 20 to 40 minutes a day. But because there's additional resources that I'm giving you that are fine tailored to you, because it's the one-on-one experience. And then I work with a former client of mine, and I really love this. He created a text service around nudge theory, which is actually a behavioral economics theory, but basically says if you receive a nudge to do something, you're more likely to do it. So for instance, stop signs are nudges. So you get text messages that are customized to what we worked on in our session to make sure that you follow through and integrate everything that we talked about. So that's a little bit more time intensive and heavy on the time commitment, but obviously those people see the biggest amount of improvement as well. And they also probably want to talk to me. And for people who are I don't know if that's my thing, there are less time consuming options as well.
Love it. Well, that's very informative. And I think that a lot of people, I want people to know kind of understand what they're getting themselves into. They listen to something like this and they're like, hey, I want to try this. I think it's going to be beneficial, but kind of know all of the investment, time investment and things it's going to take them to move through it, and being realistic about how many sessions it's actually going to take. And, I guess depending on the trauma, how much time that's going to take to pull out and be able to process some of that trauma. So I think, very informative things that you've shared here with us today. And I thank you so much for that. But before we do wrap up, I want you to tell my audience where they can find you should someone be interested in maybe talking to you or trying this out for themselves?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is always over on Instagram. My handle is at Julie Savone. It's Cyvonne. That's my middle name. It's made up, so it's not phonetic. You might have a hard time finding it, but I'm also happy to drop it in the show notes or at my website, juliesavone.com. But when it also comes to people thinking about time investment and things, I just did want to say that I think this is not necessarily more helpful, but sometimes can be more impactful if you know that there's like a specific thing and you kind of know what the thing is. Coming to a retreat, which ultimately is probably more hours because we're together for a whole weekend together, but is a really like a potent way to work through things. And it comes with support afterwards as well. And that's a really good, if someone's looking for like, I just want to get like the most bang for my time investment, that is probably the best way to do it. And of course that does involve a larger dose. It's a macro instead of a micro, but a great option for people if that's something that they're interested in and they can kind of pinpoint, you know what, I know what happened and I'm ready to move through it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll be sure to get all of your information in the show notes too, so people can get a hold of you that way as well. Everything that we've shared and talked about today, like if you had kind of a big takeaway that you wanted to leave my audience with, what would that be?
Wow, we've talked about so many good things. I would love for people to focus on that piece where we just spoke about maintaining our own personal power. And I do genuinely think that the world would be a much different place if we focused on, maintaining our own energetic state. And of course, some of that, like those aren't practices and skills that we're taught as children. Like in school, I wish we were taught more about emotional regulation. I know for myself, what I've learned about emotional regulation, I've had to find out and take courses and all of the things on. But when we can teach our children and practice it ourselves and come from that place of personal responsibility, wow, I just think we're going to see a dramatic shift and how we all interact in just the general state of the world. So never take things personally. That's probably the easiest thing, right? I could say to you, like to anyone listening, if you're thinking, God, the checkout girl at the grocery store was so mean to me, man, she's probably really tired and has nothing to do with you.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's so true. And I think we elaborated on that a lot. So I think that's powerful. And I'll just say this, like I normally don't do a takeaway, but I do feel like this is worth mentioning, that the whole thing with energy, especially for those skeptics like I was, is that you can read energy when, like Julie, you and I are on this call and there's a certain energy between us. Like I feed off your energy, you feed off mine. If you walk into a room, you can feed off the energy that's there. I work out a lot. I like going to the gym. I've tried to work out at home. It's not the same. Some people love working out at home. I hate it because it's not the same energy. I can be exhausted, walk into the gym and see everybody lifting weights, and suddenly my energy is like, I'm right there. So I think that looking into energy is powerful. And I think that it does correlate with everything that we've talked about here. And then just the energetic force of the universe, like definitely worth learning more about. And it's intriguing as well.
Yeah, I'm always interested in people who are so skeptical, because if you think about like when someone has a heart attack, right? Like what do? They get out the paddles and they zap you with electricity, which is energy. It's like, duh, that's the whole, we have a little battery inside of us. We are literally all energy.
Right. It's crazy to me too. But I was one of those. I can attest, because I went to see an energy healer, and this has been several years ago, and I was very skeptical. I didn't understand it at all. And this is something too worth just mentioning. I was raised in the Bible Belt. Like I was raised in Tennessee, where it's like there's a lot of lies around that too. I'm just going to be frank with you. Like we get into these traditional roles of religion, and this is a whole nother episode for a whole nother day. But I think that we get caught up in these traditions, and then we don't find truth, because we just believe truth is whatever my parents told me and their parents told them, and so on and so forth. Or we reject what they've told us and go find something that fits our narrative, instead of looking at things unbiased and saying, this is something that I need to explore more. I want to learn more about. I want to form my own thoughts and opinions around. So I think it's valuable when you can do that. And it does, again, tie completely into healing and just the holistic body system as a whole.
Yeah. And how great to question, right? Like not from a place of disrespect, but just curiosity.
That's why I love having people on here that sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. I'm like, I like it when we disagree because it challenges my way of thought. So, not everybody's that way, but I like that.
Too.
Julie, it has been such a pleasure. I enjoyed this conversation so much. And thank you so much for just sharing and, your expertise and just everything that you're doing to help people, because I know every step is helping someone heal, and then it's like a domino effect.
Thank you so much for having me and for opening up this platform. Really important conversations for us to be having. And, I know that it's reaching so many people who need that validation and understanding of what they've gone through.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Hey there, friend. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time here with us on Through the Trauma podcast. Your presence means more than you know. If this episode has spoke to you or gave you hope or made you feel just a little bit less alone, then I would love it if you would take a second, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who truly needs to hear it. Every share, every comment, every listen, it all helps our message get out and reach those who truly need it the most. Healing happens inside of a community, and together we are breaking the silence and creating space for transformation. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You are not alone.